Hello, hi, and good afternoon, everyone. A very warm welcome to today's panel, the EU Taxonomy, A Dawn of a New Era. I'm so delighted to welcome you on, I think, our third event into our Central and Eastern Europe Sustainable Finance Summit, which is co-organized by ISFC, EuroSIF, as well as a very broad network of partners in the Central and Eastern European region. My name is Theodor Cojeanu. I'm an assistant professor in finance at Queen's University Belfast. I'm also a member of the EU Platform on Sustainable Finance and recently a co-founder of EuroSIF, an NGO in Romania and Central Eastern Europe that seeks to advance the education on sustainable investment decision-making in the region. So today's topic has been of wide range of interest from I think everyone around Europe that is looking at sustainable finance legislation, pretty much because we are facing undoubtedly huge challenges, economic and financial challenges with climate change and environmental degradation. And in order to solve these issues, we need robust ways to understand how we can invest towards environmental sustainability. So the key is for green deals around the world to align themselves with robust environmental ambitions, such as the 2050 net zero carbon goals. In Europe, one such response to this goal has been, among the other, the EU Green Taxonomy, which is a classification system or a data dictionary, which is supposed to tell investors, policymakers, as well as the business sector, which activities are environmentally sustainable. This initiative has attracted more than, 46,000 replies to the EU's initiative and EU consultation into their proposed climate change mitigation and adaptation delegated act. And no doubt it will attract significant more attention into its climate delegated acts, into the other environmental objectives, which include water, pollution, circular economy, as well as biodiversity and natural capital. And so today it is my biggest honor to welcome indeed experts across Europe that are at the forefront of sustainable investment decision-making, as well as some behind the scenes working tirelessly towards independent advice, as well as behind the actual formulation of these delegated acts. And so I will briefly introduce the panel in a second, but before I actually tell you about my esteemed speakers, what I would encourage everyone is, as we go, if you can please post within the Q&A link on Zoom, I will be able to integrate a lot of your questions in our back and forth. So we'll try to make this as interactive as possible. And without further ado, let me introduce our first speaker, which is Martin Spolc, who will give us the keynote today. So Martin is the head of the Sustainable Finance and Fintech unit within the European Commission's DG for Financial Services, DG FISMA. Martin and his team have worked tirelessly over the past years on many of the sustainable finance legislation that you've seen coming to fruition. Of course, the EU Green Taxonomy, but also perhaps other important pieces of legislation that may have gone unnoticed to the broader public, which include the EU Paris-aligned benchmarks, the sustainable finance regulation disclosures, as well as many others that I'm sure he will tell us more in his keynote speech today. So without further ado, Martin, it's a great pleasure to have you on. The stage is yours for a keynote, for a 50-minute keynote, and then I will introduce the remaining of our distinguished panelists for an interesting and lively discussion. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Theodore. Good morning to everyone. I hope that you can hear me and see me well. Excellent. Thank you very much. And nice to see you, Victor, Linda, and Sandrine. I will try not to occupy 15 minutes because I actually would like to also hear from my distinguished panel speakers what they have to say. What I would like to say is, as you know, taxonomy is really the centerpiece of our strategy on sustainable finance, which we announced back in 2018. And the way how we have conceived the agenda back in 2018 was to be very clear about the responsibility of the Commission, of a policymaker, regulator, which is to provide clarity on the direction of travel, set the target, and provide credible and usable tools and frameworks. What we also said in the strategy is that we would like that the financial sector has its own responsibility to take up these tools and find the best ways how to implement them. Our approach has been based so far on the kind of mindset how to green finance. But the more we have been working on this file, it has become obvious that we cannot only work on greening finance on itself, but we also need to make sure that the financial sector supports the financing of the businesses. Financing green has to happen in parallel to greening finance. And here, I mean, we would like basically to make it clear that there is a dual responsibility for the financial sector. First, to make sure that the financial sector itself transitions towards sustainability, and at the same time, to make sure that the financial sector supports businesses on their transition pathways towards sustainability. Since 2018, there is also quite a big change in the context. Now we had the COVID crisis, we had the recovery, and there have been some voices that have suggested that we have to now put the sustainability agenda on hold and we have to kind of take it a little bit easier on sustainability. Well, nothing can be really far and further from truth. I mean, in our agenda in the Commission, we have tried to find strong and reinforcing synergies between the speedy recovery and supporting green transition. And that's also why now we are at the juncture where we are preparing not only the renewed sustainable finance strategy, but we are preparing the next steps on the journey that we have to take together, how to implement the taxonomy, how to make it a real success. Now, those of you who are familiar with the taxonomy work, you know that this is a centerpiece of our policy, which we hope will have a very deep transformational impact. For us, taxonomy is the most robust tool that we have so far that translates the long-term ambitious targets into what needs to be done on the ground. It defines how good is good enough. There are many other tools, and obviously we attach a lot of importance to the other tools that we have in our toolbox and also in the toolbox for the financial sector, but there is nothing comparable to taxonomy, which is really the objective tool that translates the big objectives and the big targets into the ground, into the concrete specific actions that need to take place on the ground. Taxonomy is essentially telling you what is in line with our 2050 climate neutrality and the European Green Deal targets. It is a benchmark that clearly sets out criteria for economic activities that can be deemed in line with those targets and what can be deemed sustainable. It shows the way where to go. As such, taxonomy for us is a major tool that would facilitate transition towards these targets. And here, I mean, let me also recall that this tool, taxonomy, is a tool that the financial sector was calling for itself. This is not something that we as the European Commission has invented on our own. We have really been inspired by the recommendations of the high-level group on sustainable finance back in 2018. Now, those of you who have followed this file, you know that we have decided to legislate that would introduce legal certainty and improve integrity of the markets through transparency. And we have introduced disclosure requirements for the financial sector and also for the large companies to disclose how and to what extent they have used taxonomy. And these disclosure requirements will start kicking already next year, as of January 2022. Now, I always say that there are three conditions for success of this project. The first one is that taxonomy must be credible, must be science-based. Second, it must be usable. In order for the financial sector and the businesses to use it easily, it must be easy to use, and it must be perceived as a useful tool rather than a regulatory burden. And finally, and this is something that I would like to recall as well, taxonomy must also be politically acceptable and must support transition. As regards the letter supporting the transition, the technical expert group, that is the expert group that worked very hard on this project for the last 2.5 years, have really gone a long way in order to make sure that the taxonomy doesn't cover only the green niche sectors, the sectors that already are green today. But as you know, it covered a lot of basically all key economic sectors, in particular those that are having currently the most significant negative environmental impact, but where the potential to reduce the negative impact is the greatest. And the technical expert group has done really a lot of work, but the Commission has gone even further. We have asked the platform, which is the successor of the technical expert group, to help the Commission to elaborate what more can be done, that either the taxonomy and the other frameworks can support transition. Now, you are aware that 2 weeks ago, now 3 weeks ago already, the Commission adopted an ambitious package that comprised not only of the Delegated Act on taxonomy that covers the first 2 objectives, the climate adaptation and climate mitigation objectives, but we also adopted a very important proposal that would require businesses that are covered by the NFRD, now the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive, to disclose key relevant information. And these 2 pieces are really a major milestone in the delivery of the Commission Action Plan on 2018. The Delegated Act, as we call it now, was adopted by the Commission. In principle, it will be adopted formally later this month, in 2 weeks' time, after which there will be a scrutiny period for both co-legislators, the Parliament and the Council, that will run for 6 months. At the end of this, ideally for 4 months, with an extension of 2 months, but at the very latest, the co-legislators will have to declare whether they approve this Delegated Act by the end of November at the very latest. This means that if everything goes smoothly, that the Delegated Act on taxonomy will start applying already as of January 2022, and the relevant disclosures requirements will apply as well. When it comes to the disclosure requirements, I already mentioned that now the taxonomy regulation imposes disclosure transparency requirements for the financial sector, as well as the large businesses covered by the non-financial reporting directive, to disclose how and to what extent they have been using taxonomy. Now, there have been many questions, basically how this will work on the ground, how this will work in practice. And the Commission has recently launched a public consultation on the details, on the specification of those disclosure requirements that will run until the 2nd of June. So those of you who are interested into the subject, please check our website and contribute with your feedback. The Commission intends to adopt this second Delegated Act that will specify the disclosure requirements related to taxonomy by the end of June, so that, again, the legal obligation can start ticking as of next year. Now, one important element that I would like to mention here is that you have certainly seen that we have done a lot together with the private sector, but this is just the beginning of the journey. We have not been able to cover all important sectors in the extent, or to the extent that we wanted. There are still many other important sectors that are very important for transition, and therefore the Commission announced in the package in April that the Commission will come up with additional complementary Delegated Act on the climate relevant objectives, as well as with a dedicated proposal that will deal with some other important sectors, especially in the energy sectors, that will help to decarbonize our economy. So watch out this space. The Commission will continue working on those proposals as we speak, and you will see those proposals very likely before the end of this year. Second point that I would like to mention, I have talked a lot now about the climate objectives. We have prioritized climate objectives because this is really the priority number one, given the challenges we are facing, but we should not lose track of the fact that there are many other environmental challenges linked to biodiversity, pollution, protection of water, etc., etc. And therefore, we have put in motion another work stream together with the platform on sustainable finance, to develop the technical screening criteria for the other 4 environmental objectives that the taxonomy regulation defined. And the platform, as I understand, will deliver this important piece, the advice to the Commission on these technical screening criteria for the other 4 environmental objectives, I understand, in autumn, so that the Commission will be able to proceed with defining what each economic activities are sustainable also for the other 4 environmental objectives. We believe that the Delegated Act that we have adopted now obviously is the best possible outcome. As I mentioned, I mean, there are 3 conditions for the file to be success. So first, it must be credible, and we believe that the Delegated Act that we adopted as the Commission is credible. Second, it must be usable. And here I would like to emphasize the important role that the platform on sustainable finance is playing, because the platform and the experts that we have are really working day and night to make sure that, again, taxonomy is a very useful tool to use, not only in the European Union, but also when it comes to the international applicability. And finally, I mentioned that we need to make sure that now the taxonomy is politically acceptable. So we are hoping that both co-legislators will agree to the Delegated Act as we have adopted. But finally, I also need to emphasize that the work on transition finance that I mentioned earlier is really getting more traction. Which brings me to the next point. I know that this panel is going to focus on taxonomy, but I still need to mention that given the huge and massive challenges that we are facing, we also need to make sure that our strategy, our action plan that we adopted in 2018 is still up to date. And that's why the Commission announced that later, before the summer, the Commission will adopt a renewed sustainable finance strategy that will put all the work on sustainable finance into a perspective in terms of consolidating all the achievements, explaining how the different things fit together, be clear about the next steps, also in terms of timeline, but in particular being clear that we need to do much more work on this transition, how to support businesses not only to get to the sustainable space at the end, this is the ultimate goal, but also support those businesses who are having different starting points, who are working in the sectors which are facing the most significant challenges on their transition pathways. And this is an element that I believe personally requires much more attention. And this is exactly what this new sustainable finance strategy will do much more prominently. The new sustainable finance strategy will also focus more on the risk side, on making sure that the financial sector itself is resilient sufficiently, and also that the financial sector ultimately aligns with the European Green Deal targets as it should, according to all the legislations under the European Green Deal. So to conclude, I promise that I will not go beyond 10 minutes. For us, taxonomy is indeed one of the critical tools. It's not the only tool. There are other tools that have to be used and managed by the sector, and not only by the financial sector, but by the businesses. But we believe that it's a really indispensable tool, and it's a great opportunity for both the financial sector and the businesses. And we believe that taxonomy, once it's properly designed and once it's properly implemented, should really encourage the transition, not to prevent it. So there are challenges. Obviously, we are aware of those challenges, but we are not shying away from those challenges. And we need, obviously, the private sector and the policymakers to work together on those challenges. I'm sure that the panel will raise some of them. So thank you very much for your attention, and I look forward to the discussion on the panel. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Martin. That was a wonderful keynote introducing really the breadth and depth of the Commission in this area. And I'm glad that you've, I think, put the 3 big conditions that you've mentioned with respect to the taxonomy, which is the credibility, the usability, and the politically acceptable. And sometimes these objectives, as we've seen, may be at odds with each other. Particularly, I think the science-based part, and then the politically acceptable part, which makes for a difficult job to legislate in the background and get everyone around the table to agree, which is testament to your hard work in bringing and passing the first Delegated Act. So many congratulations on that. I would like to turn for also some initial reactions to a former EU technical expert group member and currently an EU platform member, someone who has experience, broad range of experience as the co-president of the Club of Rome. I am speaking, of course, of Sandrine Dixson-Declève. She's also currently chairing the expert group on economic and societal impact of research and innovation. She's a member of the manufacturing of outreach platform in DG FISMA, as well as a member of the advisory board of Climate Kick, who has dispersed numerous funds towards research and innovation, climate change and environmental management in Europe. So Sandrine, over to you. How, in your view, having the experience of both at the TEG and now within the platform, how have you seen the evolution as an expert providing advice to the Commission, the taxonomy project evolving, and equally, what are really the opportunities for the business and investment sectors? And yeah, what can we do in essence to make sure, I suppose, us as experts, that the taxonomy is communicated, and you as one of the key designers behind years of advice, you know, what is the way in which we can engage, and what are really the opportunities for the region, in particularly for Central and Eastern Europe, as we know that has been quite vocal in the consultation period and had very strong opinions on what the taxonomy should do, for example, for the region.
Yeah, thank you, Theo, and thank you, Martin, for the excellent keynote. And let me just clarify a few things. The first thing is that I'm not working with DG FISMA in terms of manufacturing, but was appointed to be chair of outreach and also co-chair with EBRD on manufacturing for the TEG, the Technical Expert Group. First of all, I do deeply want to thank the European Commission for having the foresight and also the guts to go forward under Martin's leadership and previously Commissioner Dombrovskis and now Commissioner McGuinness to really try to demonstrate what it looks like when we clarify what green actually is within an investment portfolio. We have to remember, exactly as Martin said, that this was not about how we can bring business on board initially. It was about understanding what green looks like, so we would stop having greenwashing across investment portfolios and start to shift capital to match our European Green Deal goals, our Fit for 55 now, which is reducing emissions by 50% by 2030, and moving towards net zero for 2050. So this comes back to exactly what Martin indicated, which is the need to have science-based targets. That's what we were asked to do. Now, clearly that is frustrating for the business community that feels that they are trying to transition or trying to understand how to fit within this new economic model. But we have to remember what the TEG and the Sustainable Finance Platform have been asked to do, which is to evaluate how we can match the ambition with the shift in capital. So I want to make sure that everybody understands the difference, because this is where the problem lies, and this is where the political acceptability lies. This is not about saving certain sectors. This is about matching the ambition. Now, how do we bring in industry within that context? Martin is absolutely right. Both in terms of the investment sector, we have to put forward a simple, clear framework that delineates that ambition. But it also means, and this is where we've seen some of the pushback, is that we need to understand then, how can we also talk about the transition? Remembering again that taxonomy is not a transition taxonomy. It is a science-based objective moving towards climate neutrality. Point number one, okay? As we move into the second point around the need to simplify the playing field, provide the clear information, ensure that we don't have the greenwashing, but also standardize the alignment with decarbonization efforts. We went to a great deal of effort speaking with all of the necessary DGs within the European Commission, bringing in the investment community who are experts on the technical expert group and now also in Sustainable Finance Platform, as well as the industry representatives that we needed to make these decisions. So as chair of manufacturing, I can tell you that we went across those manufacturing sectors that created a substantial contribution to meeting the ambition to try to focus on those first. And exactly as Martin said, we weren't able to cover everything. So this is an ongoing process. But what we did try to show was taking the science, looking at what green truly is according to the science. These are the criteria that we need in order to show that we're investing in green production sites, in green economic activities. And so I think that what we really tried to do is look at improvements in performance, which do not result in activities being qualified as substantially contributing or as defined by the taxonomy, that we really bring in as much of those improving results. So that's why we're talking about green hydrogen rather than necessarily blue hydrogen. That's why we could not take into consideration gas, because again, gas could be claimed as a transition fuel. But if we're truly trying to shift, then we needed to move most of our capital into renewables and other types of green technologies. So I think it's very important to understand this point. Now, what we're doing in the Sustainable Finance Platform is really trying to better understand now the transitioning element. And this has come also from major political pushback that we didn't realize was going to happen as vehemently as it did. And potentially, we're still hoping that this new legislation will pass the parliament, but there is a great deal of political discussion and watering down of the original criteria. This demonstrates to me the importance, again, of understanding that first point, which is what is green, and understanding what are the buffers to ensure that industry can come on the journey, which doesn't necessarily mean that they are going to be integrated in the taxonomy, but very much means that we need to think about just transition funds, that we need to think about other policies that are going to enable the shift in industry to get to where we need to go. So I think that it's very important to make those two first clarifications. And then to understand as we move forward, and that's what we're doing right now, the role of the EU taxonomy in enabling the financing of the transition, which is incredibly important, in what type of sectors, and to come up, and this is why we've done now a transition report within the Sustainable Finance Platform and trying to continue to think through where are the clear barriers, where are the challenges, how can we work together with industry to ensure that we have transitional activities. Yet this is, again, very different from the term of the transition. These are transitional activities that could potentially bring in, if we're looking at investments, long-term investment prospects, what type of activities should be potentially qualified within the taxonomy with clear criteria, again, of what that means. So this has been an ongoing journey. We started off with a very clear mandate. It has now received some pushback from entrenched, I would say, activities at the European level who have lobbied hard in terms of the political level, hence why we've received some of that pushback. But I think we must stay true to the original aim of the taxonomy. And then what we're trying to do now through the Sustainable Finance Platform and through other conversations is ensure that we create the right buffers within our economy and our finance system to ensure that we bring more industry on board without greenwashing and without bringing down the original intent of the taxonomy itself. I'll maybe stop there for the moment and allow for the other panelists to come in, and then we can have a debate.
Sandrine, thank you so much for the excellent intervention, which I think flowed so well from what Martin said. And indeed, it was a wonderful articulation that the taxonomy, as well as, you know, within its enabling act, right, says that it is a science-based taxonomy, and it is about the ambition level. It's about the science and what we can do to match the science, really. And that's why over 120 scientists around the world agreed with the TEG and also agreed with the fact that, for example, gas in itself is not a scientifically green activity. But as you say, it can make sense for strategic reasons, for energy security reasons, that member states would use gas as a transition activity. That doesn't mean that currently that can be labeled green. And I think this is really important, this understanding that the taxonomy is meant to say what is currently green, scientifically green, and that there are a lot of pots of funding for transition, and that the Commission is working hard on that. The platform has had this advice. And so I will go on to our next speaker, who has actually wrote about this, and at the time when there was the consultation, I remember came this beautiful document clarifying as well what the taxonomy should be about. And it is glad to have Victor van Hoorn, who is the CEO of EuroSIF, who is one of the leading sustainable finance NGOs, organizations in Europe that have a very wide membership based in terms of asset owners, asset managers, as well as other local sustainable finance NGOs that are looking to educate the public in all regions of Europe. And so, Victor, I would be glad if you could tell us also at the time, as you had the pulse of many of your members across Europe, what is, you think, in your view, what was the main source of the confusion perhaps around the taxonomy? Was this transition versus what is currently green debate that perhaps needs to be clarified further? And perhaps what are the constructive ways in which the taxonomy and its goals can be communicated so that perhaps we get to what, to do what the taxonomy was intended to do, to have a science-based taxonomy, and then have different taxonomies or different tools that enable the actual transition to greenness. Victor, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Fyodor. And well, first I'd like to say probably Sandrine gave an excellent answer to that question with her remarks, and I wouldn't have much to add. Now, I think exactly as Sandrine said before, I think it's very important to remember always what it was meant to be, what was the taxonomy meant to do initially. And again, it's when we discuss with our members, we discuss with companies they invest in, it's always one of the main points, first point that always comes back. Is people tell me, oh, but either as an investor, my portfolio is not going to be very aligned with taxonomy once the legislation goes live, as Martin said in 2022. Or a company tells us, well, I'm only really marginally eligible and I can't align my business, so it's terrible. That's usually the discussions start like that. And then we get to phase of discussion where to explain, well, the taxonomy really, in a simple way, is meant to give you an idea of where the European economy needs to be in 2050. So I think we're all realizing that you're not meant to jump through those hoops tomorrow in like 2022 or 2023. This is about setting the long-term goals and objectives that long-term investors see that dot on the horizon. Because for long-term investors, let's be honest, it's also challenging to try and formulate an informed view of how the world is going to look in 30 years from now, and what is going to make sure that we reach those climate goals and this climate neutrality objective of 2050. It's not an easy thing. And I think that's where exactly, as Martin said, that the taxonomy is meant to fill that gap and put that dot on the horizon that, this is the journey we need to follow, this is where we need to get to. And I think when we intervened, as you said, in March, we published a paper because we saw we were very, I think, a bit worried about the quality of some of the discussions around the taxonomy, because it seemed everyone wanted the taxonomy to do multiple things and then solve everyone's problems, whereas that was not what it was initially meant to be doing. I mean, initially it was really about setting that dot on the horizon and laying out the road to there. Now, of course, the challenge in the next couple of years is going to be, okay, we've got the dot on the horizon, we've got the objective, we know where we're going, how are we going to get now from A to B? And that's, I think, where we indeed are going to focus on the transition, and we need to focus on the transition. But that is a slightly different discussion than setting, than determining which investments are aligned or not aligned with, with the 2050 carbon neutrality objective. And I think, it is a helpful tool for investors. There's no denying, for example, if you take the EuroSIF membership, there's no denying that some of the most sophisticated investors out there that have been doing that for a long time, probably they find it very informative, but the taxonomy has its uses. But for whom it's really useful is the large segment of the market who is still relatively new to sustainable investments, and therefore, this kind of dictionary or data system, as you quite accurately described it in your introductory remarks, sets that road very well to where we need to go, and allows a large part of the market to catch up very quickly. And I think what's that role will also be particularly played by the next delegated acts on the 4 other environmental objectives, which are even as important, or maybe some of them, like biodiversity, are maybe even more important in a near-term future than climate, where investors could very much need that help in terms of having this dictionary that lays out the road to them. I think we focused a lot on the taxonomy here in a question of credibility, usability, and political acceptability. I think we've always advocated for, as far as possible, a taxonomy that's science-based, because if you ultimately, at the end of the day, you want investors to start putting their money in the right types of investment, you do want the system that's going to guide them to be science-based. I think we'll all be in a very bad position if 10 years from now or 20 years from now, once another long-term investment cycle for certain sectors have started, and we all collectively come to the conclusion, well, we've actually all put our money in the wrong investments. I think that would be a shame. So I think that's why it's very important that we have this focus on credibility. In terms of usability, I think there's no denying from a practitioner perspective that it is a complex and challenging tool to implement across an entire portfolio of investments. And chiefly that comes down to the availability of the information to apply the system. I think Martin already mentioned in his keynote the proposal on the Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive that was done 3 weeks ago, which will hopefully be agreed quickly, could go a long way to getting the additional information from the companies investors invest in, so that application of the taxonomy can be slightly more refined and sophisticated than it might be now. So I think, in terms of usability, it is a complex system, but I think it's, again, something we need to work on. It's not something that we'll solve in 2 months. It will take quite a bit of time to get the data accuracy we need to fully operate it. But I think we're on that journey. And I think, again, the political acceptability, I think, and again, to Sandrine's point here, it very much depends on what you intended taxonomy to be in the first place. And there, I think what's important is we saw at the beginning of the year a lot of political lobbying statements by member states, industrial sectors around how the taxonomy was going to be horrible for their economy, horrible for certain sectors, completely undermine transition. And I think here we need to have a little bit of a reality check. None of our members, as of next year, is going to stop financing companies that are not 100% taxonomy aligned. Actually, in the market, you'll struggle to find a company that has 100% taxonomy aligned revenues in the current situation. So I think this is not, investors are not going to apply binary and say, yes, I invest, no, I don't invest. However, over time, it's gradually going to be a tool that will inform investment decisions, particularly if you're a long-term investor and you put your money in, for example, relatively illiquid investments. You need to start thinking, well, am I putting that money in the right place? Am I putting that money in something that is long-term aligned with those objectives? So in terms of the taxonomy directly, for example, having a major repercussion in terms of cost of capital for certain industries that are not the most sustainable, I don't think we'll see that, or at least we're not seeing a causality, and certainly we're not expecting that from our investor membership at this stage. But ironically, what's important here is never to lose sight of the bigger context, which is that other policy tools out there are equally going to be quite impactful in that transition in reaching sustainable investments, such as, we've always said we need a credible carbon price. We need to, raise the price of emissions in the ETS. We need an emissions trading system. We probably need to have a closer look and start rolling back implicit and explicit subsidies to fossil fuel sectors. And those policies are happening in parallel as part of the EU Green Deal. And these are likely to have equally as much of an important, impact on the cost of capital for those industries. So I think you can't blame that on the taxonomy. I think it would be very misguided, like some sectors or policymakers have done. And at the end of the day, we're starting to see capital markets gradually pricing in some of those issues. We can always have a debate about whether that's going fast enough or at a scale enough. But I think, investors are watching for those price signals. And so the taxonomy at the end of the day helps. But again, in terms of political acceptability, saying that the taxonomy will be the main culprit behind certain industries not being able to transition or not having a just transition in the regions where they have large employment, I think that is, to be honest, we haven't seen that evidence, and we'd be surprised if it's really there. But maybe I'll stop here.
Victor, thank you so much for that. You've said a lot of, you've provided a great overview of the thinking in terms of what investors are looking for. And you've said something key, I think. And one of it was, we started off talking a bit about the credibility in science-based and the politically acceptable bit, which Sandrine alluded to, but we also, I think, pressed on the usability part. And the platform at the moment has a data and usability group, which I know for sure is working really hard to further ensure that the taxonomy is usable. And I think something that we underestimate a lot is the investment required in the data systems and the data science systems for investors, policymakers, the business sector, NGOs, to collect the data and make it actionable, and of course to report on it. With respect to a lot of the environmental objectives, these data systems some of them are within the remit of, for example, potential companies, but some of them are outside their own remit. They would need to liaise, for example, with environmental protection agencies. You would have, for example, for each member state, you would have a different situation, like you would have, for example, in the case of green buildings. I know in my own country of Romania, you might find it hard to find that data system to understand where the renovation of buildings would take place. The other thought, and I think it follows in what you said, is that basically, well, the taxonomy is one tool, and the fact that we have an EU ETS, we have a renewable energy directive, we have a whole bunch of other environmental, you could argue traditional environmental policies that we've been known and used for a long time, that also need to come together as the taxonomy, if you look deep into the criteria, are built on some of these underlying policies. And so that is also something for us to keep in mind when we look at it. So we've had this vision in a way from the west to the east. So now let's move to more tangibly into Central and Eastern Europe. And I'm delighted to have first up Linda Zeilina, who is the CEO of ISFC, who is one, I think, if not the leading Central European, Eastern European NGO in the area of sustainable finance. Linda set herself quite quickly with a clear mission to educate and to bring the latest knowledge and practices in sustainable finance for the region. I'm truly delighted to have met her and seen her passion firsthand behind the scenes. And so, Linda, you've set up ISFC, and you're now, I think, you have a good feel of what it is to look at the practical implementation, how the idea, how the taxonomy as well as sustainable finance practices really get diffused in a region that perhaps hasn't been leading in this field, that has a lot to learn. But equally, it is a region where a lot of the impact could be had. A lot of the investment opportunities in terms of decarbonization, in terms of job creation, might actually be the biggest. And so I would love if you could share your experience in, of course, setting up ISFC and the reactions and the work you are doing in the region.
Thank you, Theo. Yes, it's been a very interesting year for us. So we became fully operational in mid-September. And so the team has been working very hard to liaise and do a lot of outreach and talking to all the key stakeholders in the region. And what we very quickly discovered was that there is a lot of misconception, misunderstanding about the taxonomy, which was rather disappointing to see, because it's seen as this burden, as a regulatory burden that's imposed from the outside, and that will create problems for financing transitions because it's going to make certain things more expensive and will penalize the region. So that's something that we've been hearing time and again. And well, we disagree with that perspective. And we think it's finally time to be honest with ourselves and look at the bigger picture. And the bigger picture sadly shows that we are on an unsustainable pathway in terms of climate change heating up. We can actually see already very tangible climate change effects. And I think more and more people are waking up to that, because it is easier to explain what you mean when you actually see that there is no snow or there's snow in April. So at least that is helping to bring it home, sadly, because it has to be sometimes a bit more personal so that people can relate. From the financial sector side, I think this needs to be seen as a great opportunity to try and figure out where you can avoid stranded assets, because there is danger of putting money into things that are not compatible with where we're going, both globally, but also in Europe. And Central and Eastern Europe is, well, one part of Europe, right? We are here geographically, politically, you're not going to leave Europe. And Europe, including also, actually, if you look at what's happening across the big pond, the Biden administration is also looking at working on climate. So this is the strongest signal. China, we used to, with my previous role, we actually used to work with the Bank of China. And you know what? They're pretty ready too. They are really working on this. So there's so many different countries that have realized that, well, this is just the direction of travel. And this is a great opportunity to actually figure out, how do we fit in? Where can we invest so that we can benefit from the green tide rather than suffer from it? And this needs to be an honest conversation, because there's plenty of opportunity. We see so many impact investors actually really interested in Central Eastern Europe. It's a much more familiar market. It's not too far away, relatively stable. So what we need to have is the governments as well trying to help mobilize these green projects so that they can attract money. So recently we ran 2 workshops with cities and municipalities in the region on issuing green bonds or sustainability linked bonds. So things like that need to happen. People need technical assistance. And this is something that I cannot emphasize enough. There is technical assistance available. So let's actually get off that chair, seek that assistance, and try and figure out how we originate these green projects so that the taxonomy actually plays into your hands and you can profit from it. So for example, Chance for Buildings in Czech Republic is working on a scheme how to finance single household, middle income household retrofitting. For example, that's a fantastic opportunity, very tangible impact, very actually easy to conceptualize this scheme. We have done it. We'll see whether we'll be able to publish it because it's a confidential project, but the opportunity is there. And the banks, for example, need to wake up and realize that it's not only about the biggest possible profitability there, it's also about aligning with the taxonomy and setting themselves up very well for the next decade, not for the next year. So we do need to take a slightly longer term look. But I'm going to stop there because I would also love to hear from my other colleague, Linda. So we have two Lindas, both from Latvia, which is rather unusual. So I'm very excited to hear actually about her work, which is quite unique and I think very relevant for this region as well. Thanks, Theo.
Indeed. Yes, it is my pleasure to introduce Linda Romanovska. As you said, it seems Latvian women are truly at the forefront of sustainable finance. And so Linda has actually been nominated to the platform in her own personal capacity, which often means that the experts appointed as such are recognized as coming to the platform for their knowledge, for their solely expertise. And in the case of Linda, she is an expert in climate change mitigation as well as adaptation, as well as broadly across the other environmental objectives. Linda's pursuing her PhD in terms of green valuation of infrastructure in the area of natural capital. And it is indeed a pleasure to be learning from her on the platform, in particular the contributions on climate change adaptation. So Linda, we perhaps don't talk enough in the Central and Eastern European region. Perhaps there hasn't been yet a debate and a conviction that climate change, its impacts, and how we adapt to it, and that indeed environmental degradation and the natural capital assets, some of them very rich and in abundance in the region, are truly strategic assets. Would you like perhaps to expose on how the region could think about climate change mitigation, but also adaptation? What are the sources of perhaps impact, and what are even, I suppose, the strategic levers for the region? Because I imagine there would be tangible benefits from both mitigation and adaptation, which, as we've heard from everyone, including Victor, can attract significant funding through the taxonomy as well as through other financial instruments.
Thanks, Theodore. Thanks for having me today. It's a pleasure to be here. And big thanks to Sandrine and Martin as well for outlining the work and the different work streams we are currently doing on the platform. And I can only confirm that we are hard at work every day now, working on new sectors, new criteria, new environmental targets, usability, reporting requirements, and so on. The platform is really doing a hard work on all of that to make sure that we improve the taxonomy and add to it, as which is really necessary to develop into a full-scale framework and system. As to your question, I will perhaps focus a little bit more on the adaptation side, because I feel like I'm the first person talking about this on this panel. And indeed, the first Delegated Act, it targets two policy goals: mitigation and adaptation to climate change. And it is also true while Annex 1 on mitigation receives much attention and discussion, Annex 2 on adaptation does not seem to be as much in the center of attention. It is, however, no less important than the mitigation objective. We, of course, recognize that the best adaptation action is ambitious mitigation, because that would address the causes of the risks, but we for sure cannot no longer do only that. As Linda mentioned, climate change is here. We are experiencing it every day around the world. Europe is no exception. In Europe, the key impacts are floods, heat waves, forest fires, increasingly severe storms, cloudbursts, coastal erosion, landslides. There's a long list of the effects that we are already feeling, and all that is already affecting businesses operating in Europe. And even more, due to the globalized nature of our economies, the impact in other parts of the world are also felt through the value chains of our economic operators. And the damage is already significant. The climate change related losses in Europe already total at around 12 billion euros per year. And they are estimated to reach 170, 190 billion, almost 2% of the GDP of the EU. And while there's some variability among the different regions, most regions in Europe are projected to experience losses of at least 1 to 2%, some up to 5 and even 10%, depending on the scenario. And a lot of that cost will be borne by private sector entities. And we know that the countries with lower GDPs are typically more affected. And when we look at the compound impacts on the GDP, the countries in Central and Eastern Europe are some of the more affected ones. Therefore, I would say that adaptation is highly important. It's important for both public and private sectors, and also specifically in this region. What research also consistently showing that early adaptation is more effective and it's less costly. Therefore, there's also an urgency to act on it already now. The challenge is not small, the investments required are large, and the investment gap is persistent. We are nowhere close yet to close the investment gap in adaptation in Europe. And we cannot rely on the public budgets alone to cover this gap. We will need private sector investments in actions that make our businesses, our economies more resilient. And it is in the business's own interest. Not only it ensures that the business can continue operate and create value in the medium and long term, it also ensures the fulfillment of the prudential duties to manage risks material to businesses. It also contributes significantly to the overall resilience of our regions and communities, creating a much more stable and predictable environment for the companies to operate in. And it will be in this collaboration between public and private sector that we will be able to achieve climate resilient Europe. For companies, adaptation is an investment. It's an opportunity. It's an investment in the long-term stability and ability to remain operational without major climate-related disruptions. More and more companies are also either required or voluntarily commit to climate-related risk disclosures. However, risk disclosures alone do very little if they are not followed up by risk mitigation actions. And if they are not followed up with actions, they will likely be seen quite critical by the shareholders and the investors. Moreover, adaptation opens up a wide range of opportunities for innovation, for example. Access to adaptation finance encourages the development of a whole market segment for adaptation solutions. And here I could bring in the natural capital. The nature-based solutions could also be one area where we could look into and start innovate towards. The Adaptation Taxonomy Annex 2 helps to achieve all this. It acts as a guide on how to climate-proof economic activities, and it allows to label the expenditure that significantly contributes to increased climate resilience as taxonomy aligned, and therefore eligible for green investments. So Annex 2 calls for businesses to assess the physical risks that are material for their assets and operations, identify the measures that reliably reduce those risks, have clear plans of implementation, and to follow through with those plans. In this way, the adaptation taxonomy criteria differ from the mitigation criteria. They do not set specific quantified targets, but instead they prescribe this process to follow. And because of that, the criteria are universally applicable in all parts of Europe, regardless of what are the specific climate change impacts being experienced or projected in that area. The taxonomy distinguishes between adapted and enabling activities, and that's another interesting factor. The adapted activities deal with the risks that affect them, the activity itself. The enabling activities increase the resilience of other activities of people or nature, assets more broadly. But I will stop here, and to wrap up, I really would encourage the economic actors, the investors, the asset managers to take the time and flip the pages over also to Annex 2 to the adaptation taxonomy, because it offers important additional opportunities for your taxonomy aligned portfolios, or if you're a company, it may enable you to raise green financing for climate proofing your business.
Thank you, Linda. And indeed, what a brilliant intervention in terms of highlighting the interplays between mitigation and adaptation, but it's something that we will expect from the other environmental objectives. As I can also attest, as you've said, that the platform is working very hard, as well as the Commission supporting us. It is excellently chaired by Nathan Fabian. And we are trying to understand, as well as the interplays, not just seeing each environmental objective on its own, but how climate change impacts biodiversity, water, how pollution impacts biodiversity. So we have a lot of these interplays that we are trying conceptually to sort out through the criteria. I want to highlight, we have 15 more minutes, and people can please also post questions in the Q&A, since I'm sure you have excellent and burning questions that I would be delighted to further address. And now I'm going to turn, in the meantime, since you formulate this, we have a question that I will also interweave with mine to Martin, trying to get a bit of a reaction. We've had I think a tour de force in exploring the taxonomy implications, some of the challenges, including around the data. Linda also mentioned the part on technical assistance and implementation. And then of course, we had regional specific remarks. Martin, perhaps if we can focus on just a few of these, since there was a lot. So one of them that I would love perhaps if you could tackle is on the technical assistance side, on how you would see the CEE region implementing the taxonomy. I know that there are many other tools in the European Commission toolkit that directs funds towards the region that could perhaps incorporate some of the bits that would help, for example, the data science infrastructure for the region. And I was wondering whether you could comment on how the region itself could attract this funding and kind of look at the complete picture rather than narrowly on the taxonomy. And then at the broader scope, as we think of the competitiveness of the region and of Europe, perhaps you could also comment on what's happening at the international level, on how the fact that there are many other jurisdictions that are looking at their EU green taxonomies, and how, if we're thinking to have businesses in Eastern Europe, global businesses that would like to export not only within Europe, but outside of Europe, how the taxonomy could be a competitive edge in the work that's going on in that direction.
Thank you very much, Theo. I mean, great interventions. Many thanks to you, all panelists, and also for your hard work. I mean, not only those who are sitting on the platform, but also, I mean, Victor and Linda. I mean, Zeilina from the ISFC, because I mean, you are really doing a lot of groundbreaking work in the region where the discussion is really very much needed. Maybe if I may, I mean, first, before I answer your question, Theo, I believe that we really need to articulate more clearly to the region. I am Czech myself, and anything that comes from Brussels is always kind of being perceived as a kind of threat. And I really would like to see this file being perceived, especially this file, as an opportunity. I think many speakers mentioned the word opportunity. But for that, I think that we need to do three things. I mean, we need to have a deeper dialogue. We need to have a deeper discussion. I mean, this event is obviously a very good starting point, but I also believe that we need to go deeper and to have more workshops, when we discuss how things work in detail, but also the concerns in more detail. We do need to hear more from stakeholders in the region, so that we understand in Brussels that we are not in a kind of ivory tower here in Brussels, that we talk only to the kind of more advanced stakeholders, but also stakeholders who actually are kind of starting to realize the possible merits of working on this agenda, like Linda is trying to promote. So demystifying, discussing the concerns, and we are really not trying to put our head into the sand, but also explore the opportunities. I mean, I think that many people have missed the point that taxonomy can be used by sectors and by the businesses and by the financial sector, even if they do not meet the criteria today. Taxonomy can be used also when you make a plan. I mean, how to meet the thresholds, and what is your effort over time in a kind of dynamic way. And we are already articulating in several documents, and we are happy to discuss it with you in more detail, how this actually will work on the ground. It is perfectly possible that businesses set out clear plans and commit financing to meet thresholds. So investments will be taxonomy aligned where they meet thresholds or where they finance clear plans to get there. So we need to articulate really how taxonomy can be used, not only for those companies that will be able to meet the thresholds already today or tomorrow, but also for companies that will need a little bit more time, but still the opportunities are there. Now, you mentioned the role of the assistants, technical assistants, and obviously this is a very important point, but this is just one of the pieces of the puzzle on which we are working when we finalize the strategy, the one that I mentioned. And here the Commission really would like to be much stronger on the point that those businesses and those sectors and also those regions which are in different starting points will need simply more support. And you know, it's no secret, I mean, that my previous boss, Mario Nava, now has become Director General of DG Reform in the Commission, and I had quite some extensive discussions with him, and we are cooking something for the strategy together that will, you know, make this project and bring tangible benefits. So that's one element. The other elements obviously are articulating how we can create project pipeline. I mean, there is always, you know, a kind of concern about that there is not sufficient project pipelines. And in this region, you know, the project pipeline and can be really very much expanded. Precisely, I mean, like I use the parallel that taxonomy is trying to address the sectors and businesses where the potential to reduce negative environmental impact, where the potential is the significant. By analogy, taxonomy can be a very good opportunity also in that region, because this is the region where the biggest challenges with the transitions lie. Now, it was also mentioned by one of the panelists that we are working on the, I mean, of course, Linda Romanovska mentioned the adaptation, but also the other 4 environmental objectives, the drought, the other, you know, technical screening criteria for the other 4 environmental objectives, biodiversity, water pollution or pollution in general, pollution of air, circular economy. They are very relevant for the region as well. So we are not talking only about the climate. You also asked me the question how we are working now in the international context. The international context has changed dramatically. I mean, now, especially with the US, and you know, we had created this international platform on sustainable finance that is trying to converge, achieve convergence of the different tools and frameworks, but this is obviously not enough. So we do need to step up our international efforts as the European Union, because we have been so far leading on this subject. But we would like to make sure that, you know, also our partners are working together with us at this G20 fora, at the FSB, at all possible fora that we have in the international platform on sustainable finance. And in the upcoming strategy that I announced, we will be very clear about what the European Union will do, and also what the European Union will expect the other jurisdictions to do at these fora. Now, going back to our European Union context, we do need to have a coherent and kind of embracing, kind of fully inclusive, I think that the right word is inclusive approach, so that we don't have this strategy only for part of Europe. We need to have really a strategy that will work for all 27 member states. And that's why, and that's my final point, sorry for being so long, that's why this transition finance is so important now when we go ahead. I mean, again, I mentioned taxonomy is very important, but this is not the only element in the puzzle. And this transition finance that has been basically put on the agenda by the public feedback. When we consulted on the Delegated Act last year in November, December, we have received 46,000 responses. And we realized that basically the bulk of the respondents were calling on the Commission to have much more thinking, and not only thinking, but also actions on how to support those who are currently causing significant harm to actually perform better in terms of environmental impact. Of course, we would like everybody to get to the sustainable space, which is really the space, the only space where you can meet the targets. But we have to recognize more explicitly the fact that for some businesses, for some sectors, for some regions, it will simply be more challenging to meet the thresholds tomorrow. So therefore, we need to have really much more fundamental debate. What more can be done to support those who are really causing a significant negative environmental harm, but how to support them to have this, reduce this harm, and to basically improve the environmental performance over time. So ultimately, everybody gets to the sustainable space. But there is a kind of plan, if you wish, transition pathway, if you wish. And I think that this transition finance piece that, by the way, the platform delivered, I'm really very, very, very grateful for the work that the platform has done. The report, I will put it in the chat, the report by the platform on transition finance, I believe, is a great hook for the region to really go deeper and to articulate what more the sustainable finance agenda can do to support this region in particular on the pathway to sustainability. Thank you.
Martin, thank you so much for the clarification. And it's wonderful to hear that you have a lot of other cross-cutting initiatives cooking in the background. And it's always a delight to hear. And you always surprise us with new synergies within the Commission that I'm sure it takes a lot of work to coordinate. So we have 5 more minutes. And what I would love to do is I would ask each of the panelists in perhaps 1 minute to give me either a wish or a thought of an impactful initiative that they could think of, in particular for the CEE region. Just think of it as a brainstorming session that you think it would be exciting, it would be impactful for the region, that we can all follow up, and hopefully we can have more discussions afterwards. I will give you a second to think of that, while I also announced that we will follow up with all participants that have kindly stayed on. We still have over 70 live participants, to which I'm grateful for. We will follow up with the key insights, a bit of a summary of the panel on your email. We also have a few more questions around the motivation of financial services actors, something around SFDR. And what we will do, and I'm really grateful for these questions that have come up now, including around what Martin also referred to at the other countries outside of the EU jurisdiction that are innovating in this area. So we will hopefully cover all of these into a brief 2-3 pager that we could send and follow up to you after the event. And so now let me get into perhaps the final tour of wishes, impactful initiatives that you can also, if others have, they can also write to us. And I will also invite people to engage with us on LinkedIn. So now let me start again with Sandrine, as we've started. Sandrine, over to you in 1 minute. What would be impactful for the region, given what we've just covered?
Yeah, so maybe just a few thoughts. The first thought is I already came to the region 10 years ago with His Royal Highness, the Prince of Wales, to talk about sustainable finance. And we had a series of workshops, and I would really advocate that Linda and yourself and others who are in the work that are in the region, again, have these workshops. And because what we really realized was there was a disconnect also in terms of capacity building within the countries to better understand, first of all, the role of the taxonomy versus the role of the Just Transition Fund, matching demand with supply, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's really important already then, and I continuously hear from Central Eastern European countries and businesses that they want to have greater ownership of the European Green Deal, that they want to be part of the journey, not always the bad guys. Now, let's remember that this time, Scandinavian countries are the ones that are also blocking on forestry and bioenergy. It's not just Central and Eastern European countries that have made the actual passage of this now new iteration of the taxonomy difficult. So my call out would be, if you don't want to be the bad guys, then show us what good looks like. And then let's match it. Let's create ownership. No one is saying that there needs to be a dependency of the Central Eastern European region on green technology. There is the possibility for ownership. And I clearly understand where that comes from historically, but this kind of victimization is not going to get the region anywhere. We need to now step up to the plate. And I agree with what Linda is saying. There are all kinds of opportunities, and we've actually seen it in many of the sectors. So I would say, first of all, let's make sure that we start to dispel the myths of what the taxonomy is supposed to be. What are the other types of tools in the toolbox and instruments financially and also economically that we have at hand, that we start matching and building up capacity within the countries at the ministerial level, but also in terms of advisory capacity that can enable the Central and Eastern European countries to really be part of the solution and not just constantly complaining that this is not going to help the region. So that would be my call. So I call on those of you who are in the region. I'm happy to come in as well and support, but enough of this victimization stuff. We've seen that Central and Eastern European countries can step up to the plate economically. Why don't you prove to us that you can do it in a green way?
That's a wonderful and empowering call to action. And it's true, the region now is hosting, you know, an increasingly booming entrepreneurial space. There's a lot of exciting opportunities. We've just had a big Eastern European, including Romanian tech company just listed on the New York Stock Exchange in terms of automation, robotic processes that could be part of the, for example, the data science endeavors for sustainable finance. So there's a lot of excitement there. Thank you, Sandrine. Turn over to Victor. Also 1 minute as we are going over time, and then we will just conclude. Thank you.
No, I think where I see several things as an opportunity, and indeed I think very happy to hear what Martin just said around technical assistant DG reform and what could happen there in a, you know, less intrusive but more constructive way of how you can help. And I think there what I see is for governments, think cleverly. If you have subsidy schemes, fiscal incentives, think about how you can make sure these ones are aligned with investments or stimulate investments that are aligned with the objectives we're trying to achieve. So I think that's number one. I think, you know, look at what government policies work and don't. And I think there's two other realities, I think, and not wanting to tread on any toes here, but the reality for Central and Eastern Europe is, I think, you know, one, there's a lot of bank lending and not a lot of capital markets. So banks going to play a crucial role here in access to finance. And I think another reality is a lot of the capital flows come from banks, asset managers, and investor subsidiaries that are part of larger groups. And those larger groups at international level have often committed to, you know, aligning, greening, aligning with Paris objectives. So it's time also to ask them, you know, what is their plan and how do they see the supply of capital in that region as aligning with the commitments that they've done at the international level. So that would be really my two main thoughts.
That is definitely wonderful. And indeed, the capital market structure is quite different with not as big of an asset owner structure that you would see in other parts of Europe. I turn over to Linda Zeilina and then Linda Romanovska. Linda.
Thank you. Yeah, I'll be very quick. I mean, I completely agree with Sandrine. I think that it's, as in many instances in the past, where actually we now have the agency to change something. It's just about figuring out how to do it and how to go about it and actually start doing. We need to stop talking and making excuses, but we need to figure out how we're going to benefit from it. And I keep reiterating that, you know, if there's going to be a green iron curtain in Europe, we are bringing it down on ourselves. Nobody else is doing it. And absolutely right that, you know what, we've seen really growing maturity in the markets. Like I've just posted in the chat an instance where there's sale of wind farms. Things are speeding up. There's more interest, and there's lots of very smart people in finance, people in business who are actually using this opportunity and making a lot of money on it. It's a money question. And you can really improve both the economic outcomes, economic resilience, but also prosperity, right? Let's not forget that this is a question about building prosperity. So I think we need to rephrase that from, oh, transition, yes, transition, but let's remember that it's also about getting substantial economic benefit out of this. And Inobat in Slovakia is showing how it can be done. There's plenty of different examples where people are really tapping into the interest in terms of investors and banks to finance these new, more green aligned businesses and projects.
Thank you, Linda. And last word goes to Linda Romanovska, her initiative for the region.
Thanks. I'll be brief as well. I think my main overarching wish for the region, but also for all parts of Europe, is that we start reading the taxonomy with an open mind, that we take it and look at it as the book of opportunities, because that is what it really is. It's the catalog of opportunities for green investments. And because I've been focusing on adaptation in this panel perhaps more, and in agreement with the other Linda saying we have to start doing, one very practical thing that we should start doing for the adaptation side here is one thing that's really important for adaptation is the alignment of the activities of private sector with the public sector activities. Because it is the public sector, the national, regional, local authorities that are setting the objectives and targets for adaptation. We cannot have the situation where they're working in disconnect. So very practical wish on this is for me to start these dialogues, bring together the public sector, the private sector, the corporates and the investors, and have this dialogue on where are we moving in adaptation and how can we apply the taxonomy and start generating those projects that can be financed through this. So that's a very practical input from me specifically on Annex 2, but generally keep an open mind and positive attitude towards taxonomy because it actually brings more opportunities than barriers.
Thank you so much. So we've been 5 minutes over, so my last bit is to thank you to all of our panelists, including to everyone who stayed on. There are some people in the chat who also thinks there are deeper problems we should discuss. And actually, we would love for you to continue the engagement. We are committed to the region. We want to engage constructively. There are, of course, a lot of issues with implementation, a lot of challenges of coming up with initiatives in the first place. So this panel is about a call for constructive engagement and actually, most importantly, education. Education on the science and education on how we actually get progress for the region, for Europe, and we make the green transition work for those regions that it might not be obvious and that might seem that they are, as Sandrine said, the bad guys. Actually, we can see leadership from everywhere, and that's what we would like to catalyze, leadership so that every region, every country is empowered in their own way to make the green transition. So with that, I am so grateful for your attention and wish you a great afternoon.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thanks,
Thank
everyone.
you so much.
Have a great